This piece I'm reading tonight is from my new memoir. It follows Crave, and it picks up actually where Crave left off. This is from chapter 1, an excerpt from chapter 1. And I just want you all to kind of think back a little bit to your first plane ride. Y'all remember that? Were you afraid? Were you excited? Well, this is about my first plane ride when I was going to my first duty station, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. When the boarding call came, I expected we'd file down a jet bridge leading us to the large aircraft responsible for holding itself together during flight. That's what I'd always seen in movies, so that image had solidified in my mind as I dreamed of my journey to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I stared in disbelief as the flight attendant led us out a door and up a stepladder to the entrance of the plane. The plane cabin, so tiny, made me feel as if we were climbing into a kitchen cabinet. As I placed my bag in the overhead compartment, I could see both the cockpit and the back of the plane through my peripheral vision. I wasn't keen on being hurled 30,000 feet in the air in something small enough to roll through the Wendy's drive-through lane. As I took my seat next to the window, I said a prayer. Lord, I asked, if we have to go down, please let this plane crash quickly before I know what's happening. I lowered my head, trying to hide the tears mourning my impending death from the other passengers. There were so few of us on the plane, and everyone, other than myself, was white. I lamented the fact that I'd be unable to hide amongst the crowd on that station wagon of an aircraft. I sat back in my seat and buckled my seatbelt, pulling it so tightly it looked as if I had separated my body into halves. If the plane were going down, I wanted to be connected to it, to something. I'd long grown accustomed to being out of control, to having someone else in the pilot's seat, even as I pressed on the brakes. That fear of the pilot flying too fast or flying me to a place I didn't want to be, that was nothing new. What was new was I lacked the faith that had always gotten me through periods of hopelessness, of fear. I didn't in that moment believe God or anyone else was looking out for me. I was alone with 20 strangers about to begin the flight and subsequent nosedive, which would end my troubled life. As I heard the engine sputter and felt the vibration of propellers whirring through my body, I closed my eyes, gripped the armrest, and worked to breathe. As the aircraft barreled down the runway, I felt a hand on my arm and heard a voice in my ear. Is this your first time? I opened my eyes expecting to see a flight attendant or a mother hen of a woman, sensing my distress and coming to my aid. But what I found was a slight girl, no more than 10, blonde hair lapping against her leg as she stared into my eyes and whispered, "It's gonna be okay." I looked around the cabin, afraid someone would see me talking to her and scream, "Kidnapper," but no one seemed alarmed. A woman that looked too much like the little girl not to be her mother sat across the aisle from us, smiling while sharing a magazine with a man who wore glasses and dark hair that looked as if it had been shellacked against his head. They turned from the magazine and looked at me. Their smiles remained. The little girl let go of my arm and asked, "Can I look out of the window? Taking off is my favorite part of the flight." "I don't have a favorite part," I stammered. "I just want it over." "But why?" she asked. "Look down. Look at how magical everything looks from up here." Up until she said that, I made it a point of not looking out of the window. When the nose of the plane had lifted and the incline pushed my body so far back my seatbelt no longer cut me in halves, I'd rolled my eyes back into my head and closed them tightly in order to ensure double blindness. But as the little girl entreated me to look out of the window at the world below, I had to agree with her. The world did look magical from up there. Traffic jams looked like caterpillars worming their way through trees. Cars in junkyards became an abstract beauty, streaks of white, blue, and red sprawled across a dark canvas. Shopping centers, I never frequented because I didn't have money, looked harmless from the sky. Just white squares and rectangles, so tiny I could collect them all in my pocket. The sky was even bluer than it had been when I was in the airport, and the few clouds we passed looked like white cotton candy melting against the plane's wings. "See, it's beautiful," she said. "It is," I agreed. The girl was a cute little thing, but she reminded me eerily of Carol Ann, the little girl from the Poltergeist. You remember Carol Ann and that television? "I love flying," she began. "It's the best part of traveling." Still holding my breath and trying not to panic, I asked, "So you've flown a lot?" She went down a list of the places she'd flown to: Spain, China, Switzerland, Australia. The list went on, and when she forgot a country, her mother and father chimed in, listing the years and the seasons they'd traveled to different places. I marveled at this little girl, only 10, and she'd already seen a larger percentage of the world than I'd seen of my hometown. With each country she listed, she gave a story about the food she'd eaten, the people she'd met, and the view from the sky, the way all things fit together, looking down from up high. Which country had the best view from the plane, I asked. By then, the vibration of the propellers had grown silent, and the engine was background music, accompanying the little girl's yarns. "I don't know, there were so many beautiful ones. Italy was divine, but I like London too." "What about Scotland?" her mother interjected. Then I saw her eyes gloss over, and her wild smile grew even wider. She clapped her hands and bounced in her chair. "Yes, Scotland," she sang. "I've never seen grass so green." I closed my eyes and imagined her grass, greener than my green, so green I could see the yellows and blues colliding with one another. And white balls of cotton. Well, they were sheep, but they looked like balls of cotton planted in green oceans of field. I imagined those white balls, resembling white caps on a green ocean, bouncing up and down to the beat of Mary Poppins' supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. "Yes, Scotland is definitely my favorite," she said. "You have to go there, and you have to make sure you look down when you take off and when you land." "I promise I'll go," I said. But it was a promise I knew broken before I spoke it. I wanted to go to Scotland and visit all of the places the little girl spoke of, but our worlds were so different, so separate, they would never intertwine as they had on that plane. Little girls like her traveled the world, cataloged places with the best aerial views. Girls like me walked the streets of Lincoln Park projects and cataloged gunshot victims announced on the 10 o'clock news. Girls like her went to colleges, vacationed, and married shellacked men and had pretty little girls that looked like Carol Ann from the Poltergeist. Girls like me joined the Army and went where Uncle Sam decided. And if that took me abroad, then it was no vacation. It was all work. Girls like me might not marry at all. And if I did, my husband would not be shellacked. If I were lucky, he'd stay around long enough so I'd remember how he looked when I described him to my children. I admired and loved this little girl for walking me through, but I felt envy for her as well. She had no fear of others in the pilot seat. She did not have her existence pressed against imaginary brakes. She was all go, all speed. She had faith and trusted wherever she was going, whoever was driving, she'd end up exactly where she was meant to be. I felt a pang of regret knowing this little girl was what the world treasured. I, still a little girl, but because of my blackness, was what the world threw away. Throughout the rest of the flight, she shared story after story about her sojourns and abroad and tapped my arm lightly when I flinched with a bump of turbulence. I devoured her stories and promised each time I would see those places. I would eat that food and visit the people she had met. With her stories, her life became my own, and I, despite my knowing, began to believe my world could be as open and I could travel as far as she had. During our final descent, we both stared out of the window and watched as the earth came closer to us. What had been bright, magnificent from up high became dark, weathered, too big to be contained by eyes. All my promises, all my hopes I'd be able to see the world as the little girl saw the world, flittered away as soon as I saw two men in camouflage uniforms, spit-shine boots, and bucket hats preparing to deliver me to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Thank you.